The heavy oak gavel hovered in the air like an executioner's axe. The auctioneer bellowed that the current bid was $50 million. He scanned the room of billionaires at the Vandermeer auction house in Manhattan with greedy eyes. He shouted that this was the final call for The Silence, the legendary masterpiece by Arthur Sterling. However, the room was so quiet that I could hear the champagne bubbling in crystal glasses. 300 of New York's elite held their breath. They stared at the canvas on the stage. It was a massive painting of a woman drowning in a sea of crimson red. They thought it was art. I knew it was a crime scene. I stood in the shadows of the velvet curtains at the back of the hall. My hands were trembling inside the pockets of my stolen nurse's coat. Arthur Sterling stood in the front row. He looked like a king in his Italian tuxedo. He raised his glass to the applause of the crowd. He smiled that charming smile that had fooled the world for 20 years. He whispered to his young supermodel fiancée that tonight they would make history. He believed I was locked away in a padded room at the Blackwood Sanitarium in upstate New York. He believed the heavy sedatives had finally rotted my brain. He believed that Veronica Sterling was a ghost who would never speak again. But he was wrong. Suddenly, I stepped out from the darkness and into the blinding spotlight of the center aisle. The auctioneer froze. The gavel did not fall. A gasp rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. It started as a murmur and exploded into a roar of confusion. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The security guards reached for their radios, but they were too slow. I walked toward the stage. My hospital bracelet was still on my wrist. My hair was wild. I looked like the mad woman they said I was. Yet, my eyes were clear. My steps were steady. Arthur dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. The crimson liquid splashed onto his polished shoes, looking exactly like the blood in the painting behind him. He turned pale. He looked at me as if he were seeing a corpse walking out of a grave. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply raised my right hand. In it, I held a small, black UV flashlight. The auctioneer stammered and asked the security to remove this woman immediately. 2 large men in suits lunged toward me. However, I was faster. I jumped onto the platform and stood directly in front of the $50 million canvas. I aimed the flashlight at the painting. I screamed for everyone to look. I demanded that they see the truth before they spent a fortune on a lie. Arthur panicked. He lunged forward and shouted for the guards to tackle me. He screamed that I was insane and dangerous. He begged them not to let me ruin the night. But it was too late. I clicked the button on the flashlight. A beam of ultraviolet light hit the layers of oil paint. Instantly, the painting changed. The crowd screamed in horror. Under the UV light, hidden messages began to glow in a ghostly neon blue beneath the red surface. They were not artistic strokes. They were pleas for help. They were dates of abuse. And right in the center, glowing brighter than anything else, was a signature. It was not Arthur's name. The security guard grabbed my arm and yanked me back. I fell to the floor, but I kept laughing. I laughed because I saw the terror in Arthur's eyes. He knew his life was over. Before the guards dragged me away, I locked eyes with the camera live streaming to millions of art lovers around the world. I whispered into the microphone on the podium that the real show was just beginning. This is the story of how I destroyed the greatest artist in the world with a single beam of light. This is the story of the last masterpiece. Engagement hook. Before we go back to the beginning, ask yourself this. If your partner stole your talent, your life, and your sanity, how far would you go for revenge? Would you burn it all down? Tell me in the comments below. To understand why I destroyed him, you must understand how he created me. 3 years before the auction, I was not a madwoman. I was a 22-year-old prodigy at the Parsons School of Design. I had paint under my fingernails and dreams that reached the sky. Arthur Sterling was a visiting lecturer. He was 40 years old, handsome in a rugged way, and completely devoid of talent. He was a failed artist who had not sold a painting in a decade. However, Arthur had a gift that I lacked. He knew how to sell a lie. He courted me with grand gestures and expensive dinners at Le Bernardin. He told me that my work was too raw for the commercial world. He claimed that the critics would eat a fragile girl like me alive. He promised to protect me. He convinced me that we could be a team. I would be the heart, and he would be the shield. I said yes. It was the worst mistake of my life. We married in a quiet ceremony at City Hall. The next day, he moved us into a massive, converted warehouse loft in the Tribeca district of Manhattan. It had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Hudson River, but I never saw that view. Arthur converted the basement into a studio. He installed soundproof walls and a heavy steel door with a digital keypad. He told me it was to block out the noise of the city so I could focus. He said he wanted my genius to remain pure. I believed him. I was young and stupid. My life became a loop of turpentine fumes and silence. I spent 16 hours a day in that windowless room. I painted. I poured my soul onto canvases that were 6 feet tall. I created the Crimson Series, a collection of abstract landscapes dominated by violent shades of red. Arthur would come down at 6 in the evening. He would inspect my work like a factory foreman. He would take the finished canvases upstairs. Then, he would lock the door from the outside. Upstairs, the world celebrated him. I could hear the muffled sounds of champagne parties through the ceiling vents. I heard him laughing with buyers from London and Tokyo. I heard him accepting awards for his bold vision. He told everyone that his wife was suffering from severe agoraphobia and refused to see anyone. He played the role of the suffering, devoted husband perfectly. Downstairs, I was rotting. One afternoon, the cracks in his armor appeared. Arthur stormed into the studio in a rage. He stood in front of a new painting I had just finished. It was a study of a rose garden at sunset, painted in brilliant, vibrating shades of scarlet and burgundy. He threw a bottle of wine against the wall. Glass shattered everywhere. He screamed that I was lazy. He yelled that he had asked for a red painting, not this muddy, ugly brown mess. I froze. My hand hovered over the palette. I looked at the canvas. It was the brightest red I had ever mixed. Then I looked at Arthur. His eyes were squinting with genuine confusion and anger. Suddenly, the realization hit me like a physical blow. The great Arthur Sterling was colorblind. He suffered from protanopia. He could not see red light. To him, my vibrant crimsons looked like dull, muddy mud. He had been faking his critique for years. He had no idea what he was actually selling. He was selling my pain, but he couldn't even see the color of it. I tried to explain. I signed "It is red" with my hands, as I had stopped speaking to him months ago out of pure hatred. He didn't listen. He grabbed my wrist and squeezed until I felt the bones grind together. He dragged me to the sink and forced my hand under scalding hot water. He told me to wash the brown filth off the canvas and start over. He threatened that if I embarrassed him again, he would have me committed. He whispered that he knew a doctor at Blackwood Sanitarium who owed him a favor. He left me in the dark. That night, lying on the cot in the corner of the studio, something inside me snapped. It wasn't my mind, it was my fear. He wanted red? Fine. I would give him red. I realized his color blindness was not just a flaw. It was a weapon. If he couldn't see red, he couldn't see what I hid inside the red. He couldn't see the messages. He couldn't see the evidence. I began to plan. I needed supplies that he wouldn't notice on the credit card bill. I needed chemicals. I needed to create a masterpiece that would look like art to him, but look like a confession to the rest of the world. But I underestimated him. I thought I had time. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, the steel door opened. Arthur didn't come in alone. 2 large men in white uniforms stood behind him. They were holding a straitjacket. Arthur looked at me with cold, dead eyes. He told the men that his wife had finally lost her mind. He said she had become violent. He claimed she was a danger to herself and others. They lunged at me before I could scream. Narrative bridge. I was dragged out of my own home, screaming a truth that no one believed. But even as they strapped me into the ambulance, I knew something Arthur didn't. I had already finished the painting, and I had left a time bomb in the studio that was ticking silently, waiting for the right moment to explode. Blackwood Sanitarium was not a hospital. It was a cold storage facility for the inconvenience of the wealthy. For 6 months, I lived in a white room that smelled of bleach and despair. The doctors were not healers. They were payroll employees of men like Arthur. They fed me pills that made my tongue feel like lead. They wrote paranoid schizophrenia on my chart because Arthur told them I hallucinated colors that didn't exist. However, they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated my discipline. I learned to hide the pills under my tongue. I learned to spit them into the toilet when the night nurse checked her phone. Slowly, the fog in my brain cleared. My sharp artist's eyes returned. I watched the staff. I memorized their shift changes. I counted the seconds between the security patrols. I became a ghost. I sat in my chair for hours, staring at the blank wall, pretending to be catatonic. I drooled. I did not speak. I let them believe Arthur's lie completely. Then, 3 days ago, the devil came to visit. Arthur sat on the edge of my bed. He looked tan and healthy. He smelled of expensive cologne and victory. He placed a document on the metal table. It was a release form giving him full copyright ownership of the silence, the final painting I had finished before they dragged me away. He leaned close to my ear. His voice was smooth like velvet. He whispered that he was going to sell it on Saturday night at the Vandermeer. He bragged that the opening bid was $10 million. He thanked me for my sacrifice. He handed me a pen. He demanded I sign. I took the pen. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline flooding my veins. I scribbled a shaky line that looked like a signature. Arthur smiled. He patted my cheek. He told me I was a good girl. He stood up and adjusted his tie. He said he would buy a yacht with the money and name it after me. As he turned to leave, he didn't notice that I had palmed the heavy metal pen. I slid it up the sleeve of my hospital gown. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind him, my catatonic mask fell away. I stood up. The countdown had begun. I had 72 hours to get to Manhattan. I waited for the night shift. It was the graveyard shift, staffed by an older nurse named Martha and a lazy orderly who watched football on his phone. At 3 a.m, I enacted the plan. I went to the sink in my room. I used the metal clip from the stolen pen to unscrew the tamper-proof screws on the ventilation cover. It took me an hour. My fingers bled. Finally, the grate came loose. I squeezed into the narrow duct. It was dark and suffocating. Dust filled my lungs. I crawled over the ceiling of the hallway, listening to the hum of the electricity. I dropped down into the linen closet. I stripped off my hospital gown. I grabbed a spare nurse's uniform hanging on the rack. It was too big, but it would have to do. I put it on. I buttoned the coat all the way to the chin to hide my neck. Then, I needed the weapon. I knew the supply closet was 2 doors down. I had watched them take equipment in and out for weeks. I slipped into the hallway. The floor was cold under my bare feet. I reached the supply room and tried the handle. It was locked. I heard footsteps approaching. The lazy orderly was doing his rounds. I pressed myself into the alcove of a doorway. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The footsteps got louder. He stopped right in front of where I was hiding. He yawned. Suddenly, his radio crackled. Nurse Martha called him to the front desk for a delivery. He grunted and walked away. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I used the pen clip again on the simple lock of the supply door. It clicked. I slipped inside. The smell of antiseptic was overwhelming. I scanned the shelves. Bandages, syringes, sedatives, and there it was. Sitting on the bottom shelf was a Woods lamp, a handheld ultraviolet light used by dermatologists to detect skin infections. To anyone else, it was a medical tool. To me, it was the sword of truth. I grabbed the black flashlight. I shoved it into the deep pocket of the nurse's coat. I walked out of the closet. I found a pair of rubber Crocs by the door. I put them on. I clipped a random ID badge I found on the desk to my lapel. I walked toward the main exit. I did not run. I walked with the tired, heavy steps of a nurse finishing a double shift. The security guard at the front desk didn't even look up from his newspaper. He buzzed the door open. The cool night air hit my face. It felt like freedom. It felt like revenge. I walked to the highway and hitchhiked with a trucker heading south to New York City. He asked no questions. He just thought I was a tired essential worker. I arrived in Manhattan this morning. I spent the last few hours hiding in the alley behind the auction house, waiting for the sun to set, waiting for the gala to begin. Now, I am inside. The doors are locked. The auction has started. I can hear the auctioneer's voice booming through the walls. He is introducing the silence. It is time. Cliffhanger transition. I gripped the UV flashlight in my pocket, one last time. My thumb hovered over the switch. I pushed through the velvet curtains. The crowd gasped. Arthur turned. The trap was set. Now, I just had to spring it. The 2 security guards were less than 5 feet away. I could smell their sweat and cheap hair gel. Arthur was screaming for them to tackle me. He looked desperate. He looked like a man watching his life burn down in slow motion. However, I did not flinch. I did not run. I simply pressed my thumb against the rubber switch of the black flashlight. Click. A beam of concentrated ultraviolet light cut through the dim atmosphere of the auction hall. It hit the center of the massive 6-foot canvas. Instantly, the world changed. The room gasped as one collective lung. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. Even the security guards froze in their tracks. Their hands hovered in midair, paralyzed by what they saw. The silence was no longer a painting of abstract red waves. Under the harsh UV glow, The crimson oil paint vanished into the background. In its place, a hidden layer of phosphorescent chemicals ignited. I had mixed clear laundry detergent and tonic water containing quinine into the red pigments. To a normal eye, the mixture was invisible. To Arthur's colorblind eyes, the tonal difference was non-existent. But under the black light, it was a neon scream. Glowing in a ghostly electric blue against the dark canvas were hundreds of words. They were not random. They were a diary of torture. In the top left corner, glowing brightly, was the date. October 3rd, 2020. Next to it I had written, "He broke my left wrist because the soup was cold." In the bottom right, another date glowed. January 15th, 2021. The text read, "He locked me in the cellar for 3 days without light." And right in the center of the painting, hidden within what Arthur thought was a sunset, was a perfect, hyper-realistic portrait. It was drawn in invisible ink. It depicted Arthur Sterling standing over me with a belt in his hand. His face was twisted in rage. It was undeniable. It was him. Arthur stopped screaming. He stared at the canvas. His mouth hung open. His face drained of all blood until he looked like a wax figure. He blinked rapidly. He was trying to process what he was seeing. He couldn't understand. He had inspected that painting a dozen times. To his defective eyes, it had been a muddy, safe, sellable commodity. He had never seen the red warning signs because he was physically incapable of seeing red. I turned to the crowd. My voice was calm, amplified by the stunned silence of 300 billionaires. I announced that Arthur Sterling suffered from severe protanopia. I explained that he was blind to the color red. I told them that for 3 years, he had imprisoned me in a basement to paint his masterpieces because he could not mix a primary color to save his life. I pointed the beam at the bottom of the frame. There, glowing in the largest letters of all, was the final nail in his coffin. It was not a signature. It was a contract. The text read, "I, Veronica Sterling, am the sole creator of this work. If Arthur attempts to sell this, he is committing fraud." Arthur let out a strangled noise. It was the sound of a wounded animal. He lunged at the painting. He clawed at the canvas with his bare fingernails. He tried to scrape the glowing words off the surface. He looked insane. He looked guilty. The auctioneer stepped back in disgust. The buyers in the front row began to pull out their phones. Camera flashes erupted like a lightning storm. They were not photographing the art anymore. They were photographing the end of a career. I stood my ground. I watched him destroy his own reputation with every scratch of his fingernails. Then, I delivered the final blow. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a small remote control. I had bribed the audio technician with the diamond engagement ring I had swallowed and retrieved days ago. It was a desperate gamble, but it had worked. I pressed the button. The massive projection screen behind the stage, usually used to display bid numbers, flickered to life. A video began to play. It was a time-lapse recording. It showed me in the basement studio. It showed me mixing the chemicals. It showed me painting the secret messages. And finally, it showed Arthur walking into the frame. On the massive screen, millions of dollars worth of high-definition pixels showed Arthur grabbing my hair. The audio boomed through the hall speakers. His voice was clear and cruel. He threatened to kill me if I didn't finish the collection by Friday. The video ended. The screen went black. Arthur fell to his knees. He was sobbing now. He realized that the security camera he had installed to watch me had been hacked. I had looped the footage for him, but kept the real recordings for the world. The security guards finally moved, but they didn't move toward me. They turned toward Arthur. The head of security spoke into his radio. He requested the police. He stated that they had a situation involving grand larceny and assault. I lowered the flashlight. The glowing words faded as I turned it off, but the image was burned into everyone's retinas forever. I looked down at my husband. He was curled into a ball on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of his $50 million lie. He looked up at me. His eyes were red with tears. He whispered a question. He asked how I did it. I leaned down. I whispered so only he could hear. I told him that he should have learned to see the world in full color before he tried to steal it from someone who lived in the dark. Cliffhanger transition. The police sirens were wailing outside. The doors burst open, but as the officers rushed in to arrest the famous artist, they didn't realize that the painting held one last secret, a secret that would ensure he didn't just go to jail, but that he would lose every penny he had ever stolen. The police dragged Arthur off the stage in handcuffs. He did not look like a king anymore. He looked like a frightened child. The flashing lights of the patrol cars outside painted the ballroom in chaotic shades of red and blue. It was poetic justice. For the first time in his life, Arthur was surrounded by colors he could not control or ignore. However, his arrest was only the beginning of his nightmare. The fallout was swift and brutal. The video of him threatening me went viral within minutes. It was viewed 50 million times before the sun came up the next morning. The hashtag number Veronica Sterling became the #1 trending topic on Earth. 2 days later, the legal sharks descended. The lawyers for the Vandermeer auction house sued Arthur for fraud, breach of contract, and reputational damage. They froze every bank account he owned. They seized the Tribeca loft. They impounded his Ferrari. He was bankrupt before he even stepped foot in a courtroom. But the sweetest victory happened in front of the judge. Arthur's defense team tried to argue that the release form I signed in the asylum gave him ownership of the painting. They claimed the UV hidden messages were just vandalism. However, I had one card left to play. I took the stand. I explained that the signature on the release form was indeed mine, but I asked the judge to look closer at the document under a microscope. When the forensic team analyzed the ink, they found that the pen I had used, the one I had stolen from the nurse's station, was a specific type of gel pen used for temporary medical marking. The ink was designed to degrade when exposed to heat. The judge watched as my lawyer held a hairdryer over the document. In 10 seconds, my signature vanished completely. The paper was blank. There was no contract. There was no transfer of rights. The judge slammed his gavel. He ruled that the silence belonged 100% to Veronica Sterling. He also issued an arrest warrant for the head doctor at Blackwood Sanitarium for medical malpractice and false imprisonment. Arthur was denied bail. He was sent to Rikers Island to await trial for grand larceny, kidnapping, and assault. Ironically, the scandal did not destroy the value of the painting. It did the opposite. The art world loves a tragedy, and they love a scandal even more. The silence became the most talked about artwork of the 21st century. It was no longer just a painting. It was a historic document of survival. It was a symbol of resistance. 1 week later, the auction house reconvened. This time, Arthur was not there. I stood on the stage alone. I wore a simple white dress, the color of a fresh start. The bidding started at $50 million. But it didn't stop there. Hands shot up from every corner of the room. Collectors from Tokyo, London, and Dubai fought for the chance to own the neon confession. The gavel finally fell at $85 million. The room erupted in applause. This time, it was for me. I did not smile. I did not wave. I simply nodded. I took the check. I used the money to buy the building where Arthur had imprisoned me. I did not live in it. I gutted the basement. I tore down the soundproof walls. I ripped out the steel door. Then, I turned the building into the Sterling Foundation for Abused Women. I turned my prison into a sanctuary. As for Arthur, he received his sentence a month later. The judge gave him 20 years without the possibility of parole. I visited him once. Just once. I sat on the other side of the glass partition. He looked thin. His head was shaved. He wore a uniform that was a dull, lifeless gray. He begged me to help him. He asked me why I had to destroy him so completely. He asked why I couldn't just leave him. I leaned into the microphone. I looked him dead in the eye. I told him that I didn't destroy him. I told him that I just turned on the lights. And for a man who lived in the dark for so long, the truth was simply too bright to handle. Cliffhanger transition. I walked out of the prison and into the sunlight. I had my life back. I had my voice back. But there is one final lesson I learned from all of this. A lesson that is more valuable than $85 million. And it is something every single one of you needs to hear before you trust anyone with your heart. I stand in front of a blank canvas in my new studio today. The room is filled with natural light. There are no locks on the door. There are no secrets hidden in the paint. For years, Arthur believed that silence was weakness. He thought that because I did not scream, I was not fighting. He believed that he could steal my voice and replace it with his own. However, he made a fatal calculation. He forgot that the most dangerous storms are the silent ones, the ones that gather strength in the dark while you are too busy celebrating your own reflection to notice the clouds. My story is not just about revenge. It is about ownership. We live in a world full of Arthurs. They are the people who take credit for your ideas in boardrooms. They are the partners who tell you that you are nothing without them. They are the voices that try to convince you that your vibrant, colorful reality is just muddy brown. But here is the lesson I paid a high price to learn. You are the artist of your own life. No one else gets to sign their name on your masterpiece. If someone tries to lock you in the basement of their own insecurity, do not just wait to be rescued. Mix your own chemicals, build your own light, and if you have to, burn the whole gallery down to let the truth breathe. Arthur Sterling is now just a number in a cell. He sits in a gray world, staring at gray walls. I am free, and for the first time in my life, I am painting in every color of the spectrum. Final call to action. This story is over, but yours is just beginning. Have you ever let someone take credit for your hard work? Or have you ever had to fight to get your voice back? I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments below if you have ever met an Arthur in your life, and how you defeated him. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. My name is Veronica, and I am finally signing off.